Good afternoon. In today's The Episcopal Church 101, I wrote this reflection called The Social Contract last week after I learned the distressing news of what had happened on Wednesday in Washington, D.C. I hope this new year finds you healthy and hopeful. I'd like to spend a few minutes, though, talking about the social contract under which we live and move and have our being, and the relationship of organized religion with that contract. Back when Homo sapiens became a distinct species in the African savanna, with our smaller brains, yes, sweaty bodies, and our unique ability to run down antelopes until they died of heat stroke, the social rule operating then was the law of the jungle. The one with the most muscle, clubs, and spears gets to have his or her way. Everyone else is secondary. Over thousands of years, agriculture and domestication of livestock and dogs developed. Humans moved into family groups and later villages. Later, labor began to specialize. This is the story of humanity starting about 200,000 years ago. And of course, spoken language was developed during this time. The late Carl Sagan proposed in his book, Broca's Brain, that children at play developed action words or verbs, while adults developed the names for things, what we call nouns. The use of fire to cook food meant that humans did not have to spend most of the day foraging and chewing rough, raw plants and meat like our primate relatives. This freed up time to spend hunting, building, communicating, and living together. As Jesus once said, whenever two or three are gathered, you are living under a social contract. Well, he didn't exactly say that, but it is true. Social contracts can be applied, such as norms, traditions, values, under which we live. For example, at a restaurant, you would not go to a stranger's table and start eating their food. That is a social norm. It's just not done. Social contracts can also be explicit. Look at the laws that govern our behavior. For example, you're not allowed to legally drive your vehicle the wrong way down a street. And we can have religious aspects to our social contracts, such as the Ten Commandments. And we can have church and other religious teachings and traditions governing our behavioral choices in a social world. For example, a Christian would not place a statue of the Buddha on a church altar. In this complex melange of laws, customs, norms, and religious teachings, we can have conflicts between different sources of authority. For example, in 2001, the Taliban dynamited two ancient statues of Buddha in Afghanistan. They claimed that their religious teachings prohibit representations of God, the human form, or the presence of other religions. Their real aim was to erase the pre-Muslim history of Afghanistan. The Taliban were proud of their accomplishments and felt that their co-religionists should respect them more for what they did, blowing up those statues. The rest of the world was aghast and outraged at the destruction of a UNESCO cultural heritage site going back to the 800s. This week in Washington, D.C., we witnessed the equivalent of blowing up Buddha statues. Our norms of civility, our traditions of peaceful transition of power, our cherished Constitution, and our legal code, and our Christian moral values were trampled into the mud by people who, like the Taliban, felt that their noble goal justified any means necessary, including murder and violence. What troubles me deeply was the lack of outrage, the lack of real outrage, and the fact of support for this behavior coming from high places. We have tossed aside our behavioral contracts, including church teachings, in favor of a single point of moral decision authority, the self, moi. As long as there are no norms, values, laws, or moral teachings to worry about, anything goes. And it did. 4 people are now dead, actually 5 now, because of the lack of teachings and social norms. The role of the church going forward is complicated by the fact that the wider Christian church for centuries has itself monetized misinterpretation of Scripture and the subsequent church doctrine that flows from that. Misinformation from all corners of the church led to its fracture into 1,000 denominations. We will go into greater detail on this at some later time, but what can faithful Christians do today to help rebuild? 1, practice the basics of faith. And by that I mean, do not judge others. Secondly, love everyone without condition, and this has nothing to do with hating your favorite sin. Thirdly, understand that we are all sinners in need of God's mercy. Do not repay evil with evil. Be grateful for what you have, and share as much as you can. It's that simple. May God watch over and guide us and bless us.